found out that I had been stabbed. That was, I thought I was on top of the world knowing the language enough to speak. Well, that was the night that I learned the word to be stabbed, which is what the doctor, the surgeon kind of taught me. And it was at that moment in the emergency room that several things happened. I knew the rest of my team was on the next ferry over, and I didn't know, was this targeted? Were they waiting for me? Did they know what I was doing there in the country? Did they know what was happening? Were they waiting for the rest of the team to come through because they also lived in the same neighborhood? Were the perpetrators now headed to my home where my son and my now pregnant wife was waiting? What was happening? So I had my cell phone in one hand. I'm laying there in the gurney. I'm trying to understand what's happening with the doctors and the orderlies and the nurses. And then, it's a violent attack. So the cops have been called. And so now the cops are around, and this now undercover missionary is on the grid talking to the cops, trying to figure out what to do to protect his family and his team and all that. And I'm being wheeled into surgery.
Hey, thanks for tuning into this week's episode. Would you make sure to please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel here? And please share this episode with somebody whose life it will make better. Hey everybody, I'm here with Chris Bruno from Restory and Restoration Project, and we're going to dive into his journey, his story, and what it means for a man to dive into their journey and their story to find out who they are, heal from their past, and live the life they're supposed to live. Check it out. Chris Bruno.
Hey.
Welcome to the show.
It's so good to be here with you, Matt.
Well, I was just telling Joey before we started, you're my top 5 list of guys that have had just a huge impact. Life, marriage, walk with Jesus, business, just being a man in this world.
Awesome. Well, I think pretty highly of you too, my friend.
And dude, we've had just adventures together. We've had one-on-one deep discussions. We've had adventures in Kenya. Together was the most recent one. We've camped with sons and daughters, and just always trying to be better in life and business, man. So you've got a really cool story, and would just love to hear, what do you do today, and what was just the start of that, and some of those points of the journey that's led you here. So I just kind of want to break that down, hear your story, and
great,
and we're gonna dive into some really good stuff for men. And I know that.
Well, to start with the present, so right now I have 2 organizations that I give leadership to. One is called Restory Counseling. It is a counseling center here in Northern Colorado, but we have team members all over the country. So Restory Counseling, and we focus on story work, which is kind of in the name, Restory. So story work and really getting into the depths of what's going on in somebody's life and narrative. So there's that. We work with couples and individuals, men, women, children, all that kind of stuff. The other organization is called Restoration Project, and that is a ministry specifically to men. And our focus is on helping men recover their hearts. And it is faith-based, and that's where you and I have connected with the Kenya trip that you just mentioned. So I got to this point. I started both of those 13 years ago in 2010. And prior to that had been living overseas in Christian ministry work. And while I was overseas, there were several different moments of personal trauma, organizational trauma, kind of even country trauma that we walked through. We lived there during 9/11. I was assaulted on the street with a knife once. We had a couple of people who actually in our ministry were killed. So there's some significant trauma that we walked through there, but then also on the personal side of things, I was growing up. I was trying to figure out what it was like to be a man, be an adult, be a husband, be a father. I had a young family, and so I'm trying to figure all that out. And because we were living overseas in the Middle East, we just did not have resources for that. So I was looking at books and trying to figure out this stuff on my own. And fortunately found some really good authors that kind of spoke to my soul and spoke to my story, helped me walk through some things. And then as I was walking just a couple years ahead of many of the other men on the team, it was they're just recent grads from college. I was a little bit older than that, but trying to figure out their journey and all of that. What does it look like to kind of first time out of college adulting and that kind of stuff. And so as I was walking that journey, they were walking the journey. And so together over the course of several years, that just was the genesis of this desire to do some of this deeper work in the lives of men.
So you just made a whole lot of points in summarizing that story, and I'll start with one. So just What makes you decide to go over to Turkey, right? To like uplift, because you have young family. You're how old at that point? And what's the dynamic of your family? You and Beth are married?
So the first year that we went, it was just the two of us. We didn't have kids yet. And we were in our young 20s. And I had worked and lived in Chicago for a couple of years. I worked for the Campbell Soup Company. I was a financial analyst. That is not something that people know much about me.
Till today.
Yeah. So she was a social worker in the inner city of Chicago. Okay. And then it was from there that through our church experience, through some other missionaries that we knew that had been in Turkey, that we decided, hey, this is something that we really feel called to go and do. We only committed for 1 year, that first year. And quit our jobs, left, and spent the year there. And we were really kind of testing, like, do we want to do this in ministry? Do we want to lead organizations like this? Do we want to be overseas? What is this that we want to do? Yeah. So after that first year that we were there, we're like, this is it. This is where we really feel called. We were gifted in language. And so we were like, we're going to go back and do this again. So we had to come back to the States, get some further training, raise some more financial support and all of that. And it was during the time in the States that we had our first son and first child. He was a surprise. And so it was like, okay, here we are. We're now adulting in some other ways. And we still then went back and took him. It was just the three of us then when we went back to Turkey. And then the other two came along while we were there.
Wow. So they've got experience growing up in that other culture.
Oh yeah.
Being there with you guys.
Yeah. We raised a family overseas.
What were just some of the cool things of the culture? Because, we love to travel. Obviously, we both do a lot of it. And I just love the intricacies and nuances of other cultures. What were some of the surprises, some of the wonders, some of those parts of Turkey that...
Well, Turkey is exotic, and it is the only country in the world that sits on two continents. So, and we lived in Istanbul. And Istanbul is the only city in the world that is on two continents. So on one side is Asia, the other side is Europe. And that literally is it felt like that. It felt like the crossroads of the East and the West. So it's ancient Constantinople. It's ancient, like the Byzantine Empire, like all that. There's so much history buried underneath this now massive mega city of 20 million people. And we lived right in the middle of all that. So fascinating in this history that is there in the land, but the Turkish people are not as old as the history of the land. So the Turkish people did not come to Turkey until much, much later. And so they hold a different history. So there's Christian history there. There's Muslim history there. There's secular history now with big malls and business and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. It literally is the crossroads.
And is that division, and I ask this, I just don't know, is that Western, the European side, is that more the predominantly Christian and then the Asia side is the Muslim side? Or is that just that mix is spread out throughout?
There is no Christian side.
There's no Christian
Turkey.
Side there.
The church right now overall is about 5,000-6,000 people across the country. And they are just scattered around. The Christian history is long gone. And is not held by any of the people that currently live there. Okay. So it would almost, you just can't find Christians there. So the history is there, but not the people. The church generally is relatively new. And so there were some beginnings of Christians again in Turkey in the 1950s and 60s. And it's been a real slow growth of Christians ever since. So
when you guys plugged in there to spread the word, what does that look like in a country that doesn't have that, and probably met a lot of resistance and difficulties and challenges?
Very relational, very just like, I'm here and this is what happens inside of me and my faith, and what is ever happening inside of you is fine. And I'm just going to begin to be your friend. Yeah. So very slow.
And I didn't know this until we're teaching. You guys came out for a fun day. It was like was it your quarterly or half year retreat with
for our
restoration.
Team,
And we're like, you guys did sumo suits. You broke somebody's foot. Send them over here. Right? We're downstairs doing a self-defense seminar and learn something new about you every time I meet you. I said, hey, has anybody ever been involved in any kind of attack or somebody takes your wallet? And you're like, I got stabbed in the leg.
Yep.
Didn't know that. So I did. Share. And that's why I smiled briefly when you mentioned that, because how did that?
Oh, how did that come about? Well, I really do believe it was a random act of violence in a big mega city. So I do think that was the case. But the fact is, Matt, we didn't know that when it happened. So I was living there, I think it was about a year and a half, 2 years. We had just started doing some of this Christian ministry and had found a small group of students who were curious about God and curious about Christians. And maybe like long time ago, they came from more of a Greek background or an Armenian background. And so they had some exposure to church. So we had done that. I had just spoken for the first time to this group in Turkish. And I was pretty proud of myself. And I felt like I was on top of the world. Like things were starting, ministry was starting, things were happening. I had kind of conquered the language enough to like get up and public speak. I was coming home that night and the meeting was on the European side, tram, bus, ferry, bus, like all that to get back home. And it was just walking through my neighborhood where I was on my way home. I had my cell phone in one hand, I had my computer bag and all that over my shoulder. And these two guys there's millions of people in the city. So I didn't think anything of it. There's people all over the streets. These two guys were in this like apartment building stoop, right? Just sitting on the stairs, having a smoke, whatever they were doing. I didn't think anything of it as I walked by them. The minute they stood up, my spidey senses went off, like somebody is following me. Yeah. One of them came alongside of me or from behind me and said, "Hey, what time is it?" And I remember looking at my watch and it was 9:34 p.m. I told him that. And then he grabs my left arm and just like holds it tightly and says, "Come here." And by that time we had walked, I was walking along, they were following me. We had walked up and we were in front of a bakery that was still open. And there was like one attendant, whatever, behind the counter. And I stopped because it was open, the lights were on and all that. I stopped in the lights right in the doorway. And I turned to them and I said, to the guy who was grabbing my arm, I was like, "What do you want?" And he just looked at me in the eyes. He said nothing and he just lunged at me. And I was like, and then at that point, I thought he had punched me. Now, I'm 6'3". Turks are not that tall. So I think he may have been aiming for like my chest, my gut, whatever. He got my thigh, for which I am eternally grateful because it wasn't a punch. I went inside and then they ran off. He punched me and then ran off around the corner. And the baker was like, "Hey, what's going on? Are you okay?" And I was like, "I think I'm okay." And came inside and looked down and in my pants, there was a gash. I was like, "What happened? Maybe he had a ring on or something." I pulled my pants down behind the counter. I just dropped my drawers and look, and there is a gash. And, it's about an inch wide. And it then starts to bleed. So the baker's like, "Hey, you got to go to the hospital. Let me call a taxi for you." He put me in a taxi, and it literally was maybe like a mile away that I went to the hospital. Found out that I had been stabbed. That was, I thought I was on top of the world knowing the language enough to speak. Well, that was the night that I learned the word "to be stabbed," which is what the doctor, the surgeon, kind of taught me. And it was at that moment in the emergency room that several things happened. I knew the rest of my team was on the next ferry over, and I didn't know, like, was this targeted? Were they waiting for me? Did they know what I was doing there in the country? Did they know what was happening? Were they waiting for the rest of the team to come through because they also lived in the same neighborhood? Were the perpetrators now headed to my home where my son and my now pregnant wife was waiting? What was happening? So I had my cell phone in one hand. I'm laying there in the gurney. I'm trying to understand what's happening with the doctors and the orderlies and the nurses. And then, it's a violent attack. So the cops have been called. And so now the cops are around and like this now undercover missionary is on the grid talking to the cops, trying to figure out what to do to protect his family and his team and all that. And I'm being wheeled into surgery. And it was a moment. It was a significant moment in my life.
Wow.
Yeah.
And was that it was just random? So was there any follow up to those guys?
Yeah. So the cops went out. They never found them. The cops went out to try to find them. But the next morning, so I went into surgery because eventually the knife went 10 centimeters in and 10 centimeters out. It was like a direct in and out, and it missed the artery, the main artery in your leg there by about, like half a centimeter. So it cut significantly. So they had to like open me up and go all the way down to the blood vessels and he, stitched them up and all that. So I was out for a long time, woke up the next day and was kind of talking with the orderly there to just figure out who was it? What did they find? Apparently there was another attack with a knife. That guy got stabbed in the stomach and in the butt. And which is why I said, like, I'm glad it got my thigh. But yes, but they never found him. And then no other attacks happened. I was able before I went into surgery to call my team leader and say, hey, go the other way around. And I sent someone else over to spend time with my wife while she was trying to figure out how do I get to the hospital with the baby and like all that stuff.
And you're undercover, right? So
we were undercover.
You're undercover. And is that how any Christian missionary in Turkey at that time would arrive there?
Oh yeah.
So that's always like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah.
So at that point, are you like, we should fly home? Did that ever cross your mind? Was that recommended? Just because I'm thinking of, you've launched 2 businesses and organizations, and we'll get into that, right? Because you shared some really great stuff in Painted Baby, but there's like this new mission, this vision, this idea. You go out, you execute, it's uncomfortable, and then boom, like you get on top of all that, you get stabbed in the leg, and you're wondering if you're being targeted.
Yeah.
I'm sure that crossed your mind.
It did. It did. And then it also just felt like we were so right in the middle of what we were designed to do that it just felt like I'm not leaving. The recovery process was long and there was no getting out of there anyway. And many people would have totally understood if we had left. And like I just said, we just kind of summited the top of that mountain. Why would I leave now?
Yeah.
So I just need to, and I'm a stubborn guy. So I just
a little bit.
Hey, yeah, I know it takes one to know one. So I am a stubborn guy, and I was like, no, I'm not leaving. We're going to continue doing this. So the actual wound, Matt, and we can talk about this or not. The actual wound for me was more about what happened in my soul than what happened in my leg.
Yeah,
and there was something about how I came to survive the stabbing was the same way that I had survived other experiences early in my life.
Yeah.
And which was just kind of to like shut down and pull away, close off, kind of armor up, fill the moat, pull up the gate, like all that kind of stuff to just stay away. And that ended up having some ramifications in my marriage, ended up having some ramifications just in friendships. And it was that journey of recovery after that I said was kind of the genesis of some of the things that I'm doing now.
Well, I'd love to talk about that, right? Because I think if we can look at that story at the face value and ask the initial questions, but as men, when are we ever encouraged to peel back the layers enough to dig deep and talk about a wound? Like I know men, you speak that language and they've never had that language spoken to them, nor do they speak it. So, as you shared initially, just starting to discover your story and these bits and pieces are coming together. And so talk about that. Like what are the important things that you as a man have done and what you do with men? If it's like a top 3 things they can do to like dig into their story and even get a sense of what that means. Because you and I understand it because we've worked through it. Yeah. But I think a lot of people listening may have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah. I think as men,
a big shout out and thank you to one of our sponsors, M&D Painting and Roofing. M&D was actually founded by my wife, Emily, and I back in 2005. And for the last 2 decades, we've been here in northern Colorado of one of the leaders in residential and commercial repainting, as well as most recently installing residential roofs. So if you need to paint, re-roof, you got hit by a hailstorm, we can take care of whatever your home needs from top to bottom. You can find us on the web at mandepainting.com. Hey, just want to give a big shout out to one of our sponsors, Imprint Digital. If you're a small business owner, one of the things that you need to navigate to be successful is all things online and digital in terms of marketing and your messaging. Imprint Digital, they're the real deal. They are the professionals and they know this world inside and out. Make sure to visit their website at imprint-digital.com.
We look at our scars as like medals of like the battles that we have been in. The scars that we have are evidence of how like badass we are. And I think about some of the actual physical scars, like I share the story of the stabbing and people are like, can I see it? Can I see the wound? Right? Because there's something about that that we want to be like, hey, I survived. These scars are evidence of the wounds, the challenges, the struggles, the traumas that I have survived.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's something about that I think I want to honor. And also, the scars are there because you were wounded. The scars are there because something significant, negative against you, kind of embattled, came against you in such a way that left a scar. If it left a scar, that means there was a wound.
Yes.
And it is those places in our lives that are not just the physical wounds, it includes that.
Yes.
But it is the emotional, it is the mental, it is the spiritual, it is the relational wounds that we have that in many ways, like we don't want to attend to either the scar or what actually happened, what hurt there, and how did that wound shape who I am and who I have become? How did those wounds have an influence on the man that has now evolved as a result? So I mentioned, I grew up in a family where, and that my sister, I have one sister. She is 5 years older than I am, and she is severely mentally and physically disabled to the degree that now she's, still alive. She's 5 years older than I am, but she operates at about a 1-2-year-old level. She can't tend to herself. She can't care for herself, all that. So she's operating at that level. That was the family in which I was born into. And as I was born into that family, there was very little space for me to exist with my wants, my needs, because they were consumed. My mom and dad, bless them for who they are, but they were consumed with tending to her, which left little space for me. So I learned as a boy that if I have something emotional, or if I fall down, or if I, have something happen at school, that I just need to deal with it myself. I need to hold that in and deal with it myself. I survive these things on my own, which then is the origin story of a stubborn man. Yes. Origin story of a man who's going to get stabbed and just like shut down and close off.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't just show up in Istanbul and get stabbed and shut down and close off just because, but that was the pattern that I had come to know because of the previous wounds that I had experienced.
And if you're laying, I always love, frameworks, and if somebody's like taking notes on this, so you have that story, that experience, and it doesn't necessarily need to be this big, like macro severe trauma. It's just, that's the story going on, right? Like sister's being tended to. So looking back on that, you can remember that sister's being tended to. I have needs. I've got to figure it out. So Chris always figures it out. So 30 years later, standing like, I'll figure it out.
Yep.
And that can serve you, greatly in business, right?
Yeah.
But then there's also like we're a marriage partnership, right? Like, what do you mean you don't need, right? And then it can sabotage in different ways. So is that kind of an appropriate, if somebody's just doing this on their own, what's the story? What's the observation?
Yeah, I think the framework I would offer is this, that there are the events that happen in our lives, the things that happen. And by and large, like we can control what happens in our lives to a degree, but really we can't. We live in a broken and fallen and tragic world. And try as you might, like take your vitamins, take your supplements, put on your seatbelt, work out, take care of yourself. And around the corner, there is the potential of tragedy. So we can't always mitigate that. We can do whatever. So the events, those just kind of happen. Then underneath the events are the emotions that we have. And those emotions are how we feel about what happened. So how we responded. And particularly when we're young, we don't have a context of like understanding or reason or logic. We just have raw emotions when we're young. Yeah. And so the event happens, then we have these raw emotions. And as a result of the events and emotions, we have what I would call interpretations. So those interpretations are as a result of what happened and how I feel about it. Now I come to understand some truth, some way about this is how the world works, or this is what my parents think, or this is who I am. Or as a result of that, back to my story, as a result of the event and emotions, I came to believe like, I'm not that important, or I am on my own. I come to an interpretation, a belief, an understanding, a truth that just kind of weaves itself into the fabric of my being that then I live with for the rest of my life until another more true interpretation comes along.
And that's part of Restory.
And that's part of what Restory is stepping into the moments where those interpretations were formed and wondering now, what are other options?
Yeah. How old were you, just as a man in your journey, when you were able to go back to that, say that story and that example, and go back to 8-year-old, 10-year-old, however old Chris, and say, no, man, it's this. And now it can be something different.
I became aware of this in my 30s.
Okay.
And that was about the time that we decided to transition out of Turkey back to the States. So I became aware of it really kind of in my late 20s, early 30s, and recognizing like I need to do some things, not just to the physical wound, but to the emotional wound, and tend to those things. So, but I'll tell you now, like I'm 50 now and I'm still doing this work. Yeah.
50?
I am 50.
When did that happen?
Yeah. Yeah. It happened this year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm a half century. Yes.
So what do you see trying to think of the question. So in my example, like when we I think initially met, we had painted for you. I think we did business together. We painted your house before I knew a lot of what you did. And then I just came and did one-on-one counseling with you when you were doing one-on-one counseling. And I remember the example from my story. You were like, there's a power up mentality or a power down and shut down. So I guess with men in general, are there certain, like you've got the, hey, I'll do it myself because I'm alone and I've got to figure it out. Are there these psyches or these characters, or maybe a top 3 to 5 that you see in men that say 80 to 90% of men are going to hit on one of those?
I would say, and especially since we're also going to be talking about business, I would say that those that are business leaders tend to have more of a power up than a power down. And I put that, I mean, the common vernacular for that is fight or flight.
Yes.
But I like using the words power up or power down because it feels like, hey, in response to this event, in response to these emotions, I as a child learned that if I get bigger or stronger, then I will be able to make it through. In a power down mentality, it is if I get smaller and quieter, then I will be able to make it through.
Yeah.
So power up and power down just kind of feels a little bit more resonant with my soul. And as I've worked with guys, it feels more resonant there than fight or flight. But in the world of business, I find that those that are more entrepreneurial, those that are more business leaders, they've learned how to armor. We've learned how to not only carry a sword, but hide one in our belt. So there's something about that feels true. And that was me for sure.
Have you seen or experienced power down, guys that power down that can be successful in the business world? My initial just thought is that you can't, because you kind of get run over. Could be a lot of other power up types of scenarios.
That's why I say generally it would be power up. I think all of us in some ways, we major in one, we minor in the other. So there are certainly ways that I power down that I'm just like, screw it. I'm not going to do this. I'm done. I'm out. Or there's somebody bigger and stronger here and more dangerous than me. And so I'm just going to fade away. That does feel safer. But by and large in business, it's going to be more the power up. But I'll also say that those are the more overt business leaders. There are people in business who are covert business leaders who actually hold a lot of power, a lot of influence, a lot of authority that are maybe not in the driver's seat or at the helm of the ship, but they're more that power down. And I've learned how to survive in the background in a really good way that keeps me safe. And so those are also business leaders. I don't want to write those people out of the story of being influential in business because they are in a power down kind of way.
Mm-hmm. And like the power up mentality, I see where that's served me well. But then we talked about places where it didn't. So what are some of the observations you see? Is it a lot of burnout? Is it just they carry everything on their shoulders? Because I feel like, at least for my story, it's power up and like, hey, I've got this and I've got to figure this out. So I figured it out. So get out of my way or I'll steamroll you.
Yep.
You better be in line.
Yep.
And that can be great to certain degrees. But are there some themes of, if you're a power up person listening to this, some things you should watch for?
Well, certainly if you are a power up person, you just used a great word in that, is steamroll. And I have been accused of that multiple times.
You have to?
I have, for sure.
What's up with that?
So there is that. But, I feel like the way that we are in our stories doesn't have to be the way that we are in our business. And I think that some of the growth as business leaders is that, do I want to survive my business? Do I want to survive my team? Do I want to survive, in the same way of how I have survived the tragedies and traumas of my life? Versus, what if I brought what I've learned in the power up space and apply it in a non-asshole kind of way?
Mm-hmm. So you're basically just saying we're assholes, right? Joey, mark this explicit content now.
It's been marked.
So
20 minutes in, we're explicit, Chris.
Yep. Here we go. So, we can be, but we don't have to be. I think there's such goodness of how we can bring that strength to our world, to our team, to our business without having to survive it. If we're in a survival mentality with our business, we will tend towards that steamrolling asshole kind of place. But we don't have to abdicate our strength that we've learned in order to bring that to our business, our people, our marriage. We can still bring that strength in a more understood, restoried, contained, kind, tender way.
Do you think the steamrolling asshole-ishness is more just from a place of fear and not having processed through that wound or that story and just know that there's another way? Because I think of times when I'm there, I can think back to those, and then I think back to times when I have done a better job at that. But I feel like for me, it's that there's a moment of fear in that.
Yes.
In that child, right?
Yes.
Like those core emotions of I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm scared. I need love and I need acceptance, and significance, right? And those aren't there. So I feel like when I go back into that space, I revert to that older version of me in anything, and then it flows over. I can't compartmentalize; it just flows into everything I'm doing.
Yeah, no, 100%. That is the best way to think about it. And this might sound a little like psychobabble a little bit, but it's actually, you said the word fear. I would say the word young.
Okay.
So it's actually when we start to feel young and then we revert back to our young ways of surviving that, when you're acting that way now as an adult man and you're steamrolling and whatever, you're actually coming from a childlike posture versus an adult posture.
Yeah.
Right. You're just trying to survive that moment versus you're bringing the fullness of who you are as a logical, reasonable, adult, mature man to the moment, which is where I say that's where you bring your strength rather than your power. Yes. What would it look like for you as a man to bring your strength rather than this uncontained power that you had to use in your life and story with all those tragedies thus far to survive? There's a big difference in my mind between that power up and strengthening up.
Yeah. Where can a guy start? Right. Other than plugging into restoration, to the adventures and retreats and everything that you do, or plugging into Restory, you got 2 books that we'll talk about, but just where's a good place to start for somebody who's listening to this and going, huh?
Yeah. I think just that is a good place to start.
Okay.
One of the things that is a really simple tool that anybody can do is to take a piece of paper and turn it landscape in front of you, and then draw a line down the middle and kind of put a 0 to 18. All right. Yeah. And I call this like a life review. So 0 to 18. And then above the line are the positive, below the line are the negative. And so just start to chart out 0 to 18. What are some of the high points and high moments that I had that I can remember? What are some of the significant low moments or tragic moments or trauma moments that I experienced? And begin to put those according to your age, and 1, 2, 3, kind of put tick marks along the way from 0 to 18. And the higher up or the lower down, the more significant the moment was. So, when grandpa died, that might be one level, maybe a, -3. Mm-hmm. But when there is trauma or abuse or something, that might be a -10. So, or, something like that, or, whatever, up and down. And then chart that out and just have a moment to sit and look at that and go, what does this actually tell me about what I have had to survive. What are some of those events? And then the next level back to emotions. How did I feel about those events? And then what did I come to believe as a result of the events and how I felt about them? What are some of those like one-liners that you've kind of written onto the fabric, the life, the book of your heart?
I've got this.
Get
out of my way.
I'm alone. No one is coming for me. Nobody cares for me. I'm not enough. I'm weak. I'm a sissy. Like whatever those things are that are the result of those particularly tragic moments. How would you like to like name those things? One of my mentors, he says, like, we cannot heal that which we do not name. So beginning to name some of those things is really the beginning point.
Is there any value in even going a step further to say, where has an example of this been, beneficial? Because there's two sides, I think, to every coin, right? I know where the power up serves me, but I also see where it sabotages or it screws things up, mucks things up. Does that bring value, or is it just looking at that statement saying, do you want it at all, or do you just want it in certain cases?
Well, so one of the things that I think is a little bit different about my approach is actually saying thank you to your survival techniques. So if you did become a badass and you did learn how to fight, maybe you developed an addiction to something in your teenage years or early 20s. Maybe there was some kind of something that you had to use to survive. Instead of condemning it and hating it and being disgusted by it or just looking at it with shame, what if you were to actually turn back and look at it with, like, that is actually how I survived. That is actually how I made it through. And however unhealthy of a choice it was, however it may have led me into a life of addiction or into other kinds of struggles, or it led me to not be able to trust people, whatever that is, it helped me survive the moment with the level of intellect and maturity that I had at that moment. It helped me survive. And now.
So it was a good thing in a way, in a certain perspective.
It could have been a good thing.
It could have been a good thing.
It could have been a good thing.
So appreciating it.
Let's say thank you. And now I, as an adult, do I want to continue saying yes to that same survival technique? Or are there some other options? Are there some other ways that I can begin to unpack that more for me in a different and more healthy way?
And it just seems, I'm thinking through examples of in my life, it seems like that approach gives that issue that you don't want in your life, right? And we know this in the present on paper. It just gives it less of a claw in you.
Yes.
And an easier ability. It's like, hey, thank you.
It diffuses its power.
Yeah. Goodbye. I think what did you relate mine to? It's like you got this crazy ex-girlfriend that you can't get rid of. Like tell her thanks and say, see you later. I can't even remember what we were talking about, but it's just versus, oh man, I'm never going to get, I'm bad. This is bad. And then it just sinks in even deeper.
We're highly committed to our shame and our self-contempt. And those are actually two ways that we protect ourselves from other things that are really good. Like we're highly committed to, this is disgusting, this is bad, or you're an idiot. Why did you ever get into that? Who was this ex-girlfriend of yours? And why was I so dumb to give such a large portion of my heart to this girl that I don't even know who she is anymore? Like that kind of stuff. Rather than having that posture of contempt, or if it's an addiction, if it's pornography or alcohol or whatever, rather than having like this disgusting self-contemptuous posture towards ourselves. What did it serve you? Mm-hmm. How did it help you survive the other tumult in your life and your family of origin or other things that were happening? And what would you like to say to it now? I don't need you anymore. Yeah. I can diffuse the power by saying thank you and goodbye. And I say yes to this other thing.
Love that. So with all the men you work with, right? Mm-hmm. Like, what's the biggest thing you see? Is it drugs? Is it alcohol? Is it chasing the money? Is it pornography?
Yes.
Yes to all of them.
Yes,
right?
to all of them. I think the biggest thing that I see, Matt, is most men have grown up with a belief that they are not enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I am not enough. And like I'm always, I have that. And so one of the questions that I have had to ask myself is enough for what and by whose measure?
If your life or business are cluttered up with junk right now, then you've got to reach out to one of our sponsors, Hulk Addicts Hauling. Hulk Addicts can come out to your home or business to do anything from removing junk to appliances. Maybe you're demoing or doing construction on a property and you need it cleared out. Maybe you need a big dumpster dropped off that they can roll off later. Make sure to check them out at hulkaddictsjunk.com. They are serving all of Northern Colorado as well as up and down the Front Range. Hey, if you're a business owner and you need to do some renovation in your space or possibly build a building from the ground up, you have to connect with one of our sponsors, Mendel Construction. Mendel Construction is a commercial construction company that's been around since 1997, serving all of Colorado. They can do a small tenant finish all the way up to ground up construction of a new building for your business. Check them out at mendelandcompany.com. That's MENDEL and company.com. If you're a Christian small business owner and you live in Northern Colorado, you have to check out one of our sponsors, the Foundry Advisory. The Foundry is a Christian executive peer advising group that connects other business owners in the community to help you focus on your faith, your life, your leadership, and your business. Make sure to check them out at thefoundryadvisory.com.
Enough for what? Like by being born male, everything in you to be the man that God made you to be was already put inside of you.
Yes.
Right? That you've got a son, and
Yes.
when he was a boy, like it was inevitable that he was going to become a man.
Yes.
Same thing for each one of us. That am I not enough? Where is the level? Where is the measuring stick of my manhood?
And who's measuring it?
And who's measuring it, and who holds the stick? Right? There is
Yeah.
no stick.
Mm-hmm.
But we grow up believing that there is.
But somebody created a stick in your life, whether you created it self-imposed or you heard something from somebody.
Yes.
You know, mine was like I was brilliant. Like I finished your 42 minutes of math in 3 minutes. Give me more math. And they're like, you're a troublemaker. Sit down, shut up, go to the principal's office. Yep. You're a troublemaker. So I was labeled, ADD, drug 'em. My parents are like, dude, at school, 8 to 3, whatever the school hours are, he's yours. Like, deal with him there because we get to deal with it. Like, we get to deal with him when he's home, right? So I was constantly being told that, like, sit down, shut up, you're a troublemaker. Versus, hey, like you're pretty creative. You've got some good ideas. Let us give you more stuff to do, or maybe give you a leadership position. It wasn't until
differently people
started plugging me into that. So like that was just one example.
Yeah. Well, and that would be one of the interpretations that you would have grown up with, is that you're a troublemaker, and you kind of still are, Matt.
And then I kind of owned it, but I kind of owned that troublemaking.
You owned it. Yeah.
Well, and then I'm just like, okay, I'm in this environment where like, all right, well, I think I know that I'm not. So I have this, I know better than you. So this questioning of authority, I'm just like, give me more to do. Like, give me something. Keep me busy.
Yeah.
So, and then I flowed that into business, right? So I make a couple $1,000s cutting grass at like 10 years old, as I'm getting bullied, right? So severely.
Totally.
So I've got that. And I'm like, so money's my thing. Money's my identity, my certainty, and that's great. Like I know how to go make money, but it's never enough.
Yeah.
Like no matter how much I make, it's just never enough. Could always be more. I'll always look at the bad moves or the losses or the dips as opposed to, hey, we started off with nothing.
Right.
So yeah, deal with that. And that's just cool to go back to and experience that and see that.
I would say, Matt, that it's probably a way I would phrase this is, what have you done to medicate or mitigate your feeling of not enoughness? Mm-hmm. Where have you placed that? Is it in business? Is it in marriage? Is it in your children? Is it in being the best soccer coach for your children? Is it in your education? Is it in the kind of car that you have or the bank account that you have? Yeah. Where have you projected out this some deep need inside of you needs to know that you are enough. And so where are you looking for your enoughness?
Yes.
So like that. That's why I say
question.
Yes. Yeah. Marriage, wife, kids, business, bank, whatever it is.
Man. So you started talking about, Man Maker Project. We started kind of circling around that.
Okay.
Share a little bit about that book. So you have Man Maker Project, you have Sage.
Yep.
And it's kind of these two passages of boy to manhood and then manhood to
Becoming a
wise
sage. Yeah.
So maybe give just a quick overview of that, the key components of Manmaker.
Yes.
That's great.
So Manmaker Project was really a journey that I was on with my son. And it came out of those experiences back in the genesis of that stuff happening in Turkey inside of my life. Like, oh, there are parts of me that feel really unfathered and underfathered inside of my life and my story. Like, how am I supposed to be a man and lead this kind of ministry and lead this kind of team and grow this kind of family if I didn't have that myself? So I had to do some of that personal work first of like coming to know who I am as a man. But at the moment, my son, I mentioned this a minute ago, like he was a surprise. And so I am standing there in the hospital room. My wife is asleep. I'm holding this newborn. And, back to the explicit nature of this podcast, like I have an oh shit moment while I'm standing there looking at the sunrise, going like, what am I going to do with this kid? How am I supposed to father him if I feel so unfathered myself? And so from the minute that he was born, really until his early, I should say like late single digits, like 8, 9, 10, okay, I was doing some of my own work. But then I knew like, hey, there was something significant. There is something significant in the life of every person, but particularly as we're talking about boys here, every boy, when he transitions from that boy into man. And girls and women, they have a physical transformation that happens when they go through puberty and they start the woman cycle. They start the womanness of them. Yep. There's not something that starts of the man cycle. But so we need to really mark that rite of passage transition. And so that's where Manmaker Project came about. I wanted to have an intentional rites of passage journey for my son. And I knew that I, as the dad, was going to be the driver of that. And I was inviting kind of a company of men into that journey with him. So the way I talk about it is that the first passage of a man's life is when the father finds the man within the boy and calls him forth.
Yes.
That passage, that rite is, I am calling forth the man that is placed inside of you and inviting you to the table of men, inviting you into the company of men. Now, I did that. You've done that with your son. Like I've done that. And, my son at that time was 12 years old, 13 years old. And even though we had a whole year journey that I led him on and all of that, by the time he was 13, I can tell you, like, he did not become a man. He's now 23. He still is becoming a man, but I needed to invite him into the circle of men so that I believe that men make men, which is why it's called the Manmaker Project. So that's the first one. The second passage of a man's life is, you kind of become a man, and then a lot of times in our society, we think that we just stay a man the rest of our lives. And the reality is that there is a second passage where there's a shift, and it starts to kind of bubble up, just like puberty started to bubble up in you as a 10, 12, 13-year-old. There's some passage parts of us that bubble up in our middle age, and typically we've called it midlife crisis. It is,
is that 38 to
50? I would say 35, something like
okay,
that to 50, 55, 60, somewhere in that range, long range.
Okay.
But it starts to bubble up inside of us. And it's like, oh, is this what my life is about? Is this what I want my life to be about? Where have I placed my identity in my wife, my business, my kids, my car, those kinds of things? Is this all that there is? Is there more for me in this world? And so that's when you start to feel those things. You're starting to enter into that bubble up middle ground of middle age, and your heart is preparing you for the next passage. And that is from man into what I call sage, that older, wiser sage, the elder of our communities. And the fact is that every single one of us will become elderly. We'll all grow old, but not every one of us will become an elder. Only those who have an intentional transition from man into sage are the elders. Otherwise, you're just elderly. You're just old. Yeah. And what I mean by sage is that you as a man have stepped into a place of your life where you're like, it is not about what I do, but it is about who I am. It's not about what I bring, but it's about the presence that I bring. That is what a sage is. And I don't know if you guys listening now or you, Matt, like if you know some of those guys that they walk into the room, they don't fill the entire space with their presence, but they fill their entire space with their invitation.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? They don't, it's like, oh, he's here. I feel like I can be at rest. I can feel like I can be myself. I feel like I can be just around. I want to actually hear what he has to say, but he's not telling all of his stories and bulldozing everybody and making it all about him. The room doesn't have to be about him. The room is actually an invitation into him to where he can be present with you and you can be present with him. We've lost the art of being a sage.
And how much of part of that sage process or that sage person, they're pulling that out and they're helping. There's got to be a component of that, right? Helping them discover that in other men.
Oh, eventually,
on
for sure.
journey.
Eventually, for sure.
Love that.
The way I like to talk about it too is that behind every hero is another hero.
Yeah.
So think about sages, whether they're, just some fictional characters, right? Behind Luke Skywalker is Yoda. Yeah. Behind Harry Potter is Dumbledore. Behind Frodo is Gandalf. Those are the sages that actually create the guidance and trajectory of the hero's journey. You can't have a hero without a sage. Yeah. And those are the kinds of men that I think that we long for, we need, we want in our lives. And whether they're business sages or marriage sages or child rearing sages, we need those men in our lives, not to give us advice. We can go to YouTube for advice, right? We actually don't want advice. What we want is presence. We want to know like, hey, somebody has walked these kinds of roads before me and I get to be with him in his like settledness. There's something about him that's like nonplussed, unflappable. He just knows like, and here we are, we're going to be okay. I love, if I can just use the Yoda example, I love how like crazy spinning Luke Skywalker flies off to the edge of the galaxy because the dark side of the force is overwhelming the good. And he comes to Yoda and he just like shows up on his doorstep and Yoda's like, hi, would you like some stew? And it's just like, I'm here. Welcome into my home. Have a seat.
Yeah.
Watch your head. That's what Yoda's like. And I feel like that's the kind of presence that a sage brings. So if I can put them two together, in the first passage of a man's life is when we find the man within the boy and call him forth. The second passage of a man's life is where we find the boy within the man and we bring him home. We bring him home to the place of like, I know those parts of my life and story. I have healed those wounds. I have attended to those, those tragedies and traumas that the power up, power down things that we were talking. I've attended to those things and I can be settled inside of me.
Yeah. And you've got to do one before the other.
And you do one before the other.
But the latter still brings it back.
It always brings it back.
Ties it back.
It brings it back.
I love that. And just a really quick question, not totally off topic, but when you wrote Sage, you did it in a really interesting way. So like for me, Spain, right? That's Ireland for you.
Yeah.
You have this passion for Ireland. Just talk about that because I thought that was a really cool process that you went through when you wrote your book.
I won't get into the whole story, but really from the time I was 16 years old, I became like infatuated with the British Isles. I had never lived there, never been there. I just became infatuated with the Celtic story and the Celtic lore and all that kind of stuff because of some books I had been reading. And so when it came time for me to write Sage, I had already been with some friends of mine in Scotland. We had this like epic middle-aged trip together where we were all in our young 40s. And so I had already got exposure to that. And I was like, that was a journey that I needed to do with friends. This is a journey that I need to do on my own. And so in January, I rented an Airbnb for a month and I took off and I went and I was alone for the entire month on the far western coast of Ireland in January. And if you guys know, like it's blustery and windy and rainy, and January is not the time to be in Ireland. It's not very hospitable, but I knew that it was representative of the landscape of my life, and the landscape of my heart was kind of mirrored in the landscape and the geography that I found myself in. So I sat there in this Airbnb in Ireland on the far western coast, right? Right next to the cliffs with the raging seas and the wind and all that, and wrote and just wrote and wrote and wrote. And it was far more about my journey, hoping that it would be helpful for other people, as I did some of that work myself.
Yeah. And you were about a month, and
you
came back with the manuscript. I remember that.
I did come back with a manuscript. Yeah. And as you know, as a writer, you come back with a manuscript and you're like, oh crap, now I have to edit the thing. So there is all that. So that it was a journey before the book was actually finished, but it came out in September 22.
So just knowing you, what's the next book? What do you have coming down the pipe?
Oh, well, I've got 3 that I'm kind of percolating around. I wrote the Manmaker Project, and that's about raising boys. I'm thinking about a fathering daughters book and what that's like for us as men to intentionally father our daughters, because they need us as well. Another book I'm thinking about is called Restory. It is about the journey that we've talked about, kind of this restorying process that's part of a greater story work umbrella out there in the world, but it's kind of my unique approach to that. And then one that is, I don't have a title for it yet, Matt, but the best I can do right now is, I'm even afraid to kind of say it, is...
Did you buy the domain yet?
I did not buy the domain
maybe
yet.
Don't say it.
Okay. Well,
you can say it.
It is...
But we'll buy the domain before this goes live. By the time this goes live, you'll have the domain.
Buy the domain. Oh, that's a good thought. Is the theology of the penis. I'll just let that sit
I don't
out
think
there.
he was going to say that.
Yeah.
Theology of the penis.
Yes.
What's the book description on the back? What does that cover look like? First of all,
yeah, I don't. Please do not ask me that.
but give a rundown of that.
So
it's a great hook.
Thank you. I do believe that we were created in the image of God, and that image is born when we look in Genesis. We were created in the image of God, male and female. He made us. And so there is something about our physiology that also reflects who God is. And when we think about the female form, there is the creator God, there is the womb of God, there is the nurture of God, there is the comfort, there is the tenderness, there is the suppleness, there is the literal feeding from her body to the child, from God's body to us. There is something about his provision in that way. Well, what is that in us men? So there is also a representation of the image of God in who we are as men. And I think it's not just primarily focused in the genitalia, but I think in our entire body, in our presentation. But there is something about the theology that God has written into our lives.
That's interesting. There's a lot of places I could go. You could dig into that. I like that.
Yeah.
Really cool.
Yeah. I have a lot of thoughts, and I already teach about this in some places, but I feel like it needs to be written down.
So for everybody listening, you do, I know everything you do because we've experienced a lot of what you do. So talk about with Restory, like what's available to people, right? So they listen to this, they connect, check out some of your content, read your book.
Yeah.
What's all available to people out there?
Yeah. So I put it in 3 categories under Restory. All right. So first, we do counseling, we do therapy, we do spiritual direction, we do what's called story work coaching. All of that is where you work with a counselor, kind of one-on-one, and whether it's live in person here in Northern Colorado or virtually, wherever you are, you can connect with a Restory counselor. That's for those people who are like, I have something in my life that feels like I want to tend to. Just like I said earlier, there are some stories. Maybe you're struggling with some kind of depression or anxiety, something kind of in that realm of mental health, but it doesn't have to be that. You can connect with Restory because you just want to work on your life. So there's that. The second thing that I would say is that we have what are called intensives. And these are either one-on-one with me or one-on-one with one of our other team members, where you come to Northern Colorado, you spend some time with us, and we will spend like 2.5 days just focus on you and your life and your story, whatever it is that you're wanting to attend to. And we do that one-on-one, or we'll do some group intensives. Like in a couple of weeks, we have a men's intensive where there are 6 men that are coming, and we'll do that in a group setting. It's a little bit longer, and there's so much power in doing that in a group setting. So the intensives. And then the third is we have an online kind of presence as well, where we have some online courses, but primarily we have what's called the Thrive Marriage Lab. And the Thrive Marriage Lab is really designed to help couples who want to enrich their lives. They maybe find themselves in a stuck place, or in a like, we're just settling for, I guess this is as good as it's going to get. This is not for couples who are in crisis, like, hey, there's some major betrayal or infidelity, or about to get divorced. Not those kinds of couples, but couples that are just like in some kind of marital rut, or maybe they're not even in a rut where it feels bad. It's just like we want to enrich our marriage.
Yeah.
So the Thrive Marriage Lab is something there. And we do one cohort a year where you join us, and it is online. There's teaching, there's guiding, there's coaching, there's weekly connections with us and another marriage counselor on my team. So that can be anyone, anywhere can join the Thrive Marriage Lab.
Wow. Love that. Anybody that speaks English anywhere in the world could join that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And Restoration Project. So I've worked a little bit really on the one-on-one basis with the counseling side of things, but RP, man, Riley and Haley, both father-daughter, father-son, campouts, base camps. And then Riley and I were just in Kenya, and we got a shout out. You got to look in, shout out. You're here in this camera. Bukin.
Hey, Bukin.
Mashianga, we love you guys, man, and everybody back there. Thanks for hosting us. That was amazing.
Yes.
So we'll kind of part Kenya come to it. But talk about that, those different kind of age groups and experiences that you do with fathers and their children, and the importance of those.
Well, really born out of the Manmaker project journey, we started doing, it wasn't just the content, but then we started realizing like there were some experiences that we could offer and invite other men into and bring their children. So we do what's called expeditions or adventures with dads, and we range it out to the age group of your child. So we have what's called a base camp, which is for the younger kids, and we have a base camp for dads and their sons. We have a separate one for dads and their daughters. And those are like 2-3 days of camping out. And it's not just like going to the family camp at church or something like that, or like Boy Scouts. The focus is on the relationship that you have with your son, the relationship that you have with your daughter, and really helping you think differently about your own life and your own story as a man and as a father, and then how is that impacting your son or daughter. The younger ones is also like looking to how do we start that process so that the second stage, which is what we call backcountry, and we do backpacking trips, we do canoe trips, we've got some whitewater trips, like that kind of stuff that we take dads and their teenage kids into the backcountry. And those are 5 days in the wilderness. And those are just epic, just like bucket list opportunities for you. And even if you have no exposure to the to the wilderness, like we got you. And we provide everything. You literally just show up, and we've designed them so that you show up, and the only thing that you need to focus on is like, you actually got to hike yourself or paddle yourself. But the only thing that you need to focus on is your kid and the relationship with your son or daughter. Everything else is taken care of for you. So there's that. But even if you're a backpack canoe aficionado, again, we want you to step away from the typical role of being the backpack guide and just be a dad for the week. Just focus on being with your son or daughter. So we do those experiences, and it's all architected and guided out. Yeah. And then the one that you talked about, which is what we call Trek, and that is Kenya was last year. This year, we're going to Costa Rica, and that is with dads and their older kids who are in that we're edging towards the time that they're going to leave our home. And we want to launch them out into the world with an awareness of themselves, with an awareness of the world, with kind of a brokenness inside of them for the world, on behalf of the world, and all that, and really kind of set them up to be the best young adult that they can be. So that's that trek, which is where we spent our time in Kenya last summer with you and Riley.
And what were some of the top memories? I've got so many. I remember the proudest moment of Riley. He's quiet. He's introverted. You know, he says what he needs to say when it matters to be said. and and that's like his strength and his superpower. We're sitting in this 10 by 10 tin hut, right? In the slums of Nairobi. Like we're literally trekking down the street. Everybody's like, what do they call us?
What was that word?
Manzugu?
Mzungu.
Yeah. White guys. And everybody's looking at us and we're carrying bags of $20 worth of flour, oil, soap, just basic necessities to go to these families, visit these families.
Yep.
And they invite us into their home. They're cooking us food. And I mean, it's literally, this room's bigger. This is
room.
two sizes of a home. And he's sitting there and just prays for this Kenyan family.
Yeah.
And like loves on these people. It was super, super cool.
Yeah.
That was awesome.
Yeah. That was a sweet moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What were some of your top memories of that trip?
Oh, so my daughter was also with us on the trip, and that was fantastic to be able to lead a trip with one of my kids along. She is now a senior in high school, and so she's just about to fly the coop. But she's also kind of a budding videographer and filmmaker. And so what she got to do during the trip was she brought her camera and equipment and was on behalf of Mashiyangu organization, which is the local ministry that we connected with. On behalf of them, she interviewed a bunch of their volunteers. She took video of some of the things we were doing. She heard from the founders and captured them on screen and all that, and then put together like a 5-minute promo video as a result of our time there. And it was, in my mind, one of the most stunning representations of what they do in their language and without really showing any of us, because it wasn't about us. It was about what they're doing and to try to like promote what they're doing in their own community amongst other Kenyan organizations, ministries, the government, all that kind of stuff. So I loved watching her do that, and then kind of coming home and putting it all together.
Yeah, that was an awesome trip. We gotta go back. We gotta have a reunion sometime back then.
Yeah, we do.
That was a cool experience.
Yeah, we do. That was fun.
Do we want to talk about the we're standing in the middle of the roadway?
Oh,
dirt way.
It seems important to you, so let's talk about it.
It was just a fun memory that I have with you.
I will. Before you share the story, why don't you share your side of the story, and then I'll share my side of the story. Before you do, a couple of days ago, we were reflecting as a family on 2023, and my daughter Sophie, she brought this story that we're about to talk about as one of the quintessential moments of 2023 for her, and just the joy of being able to participate in what was happening there. So
yeah. And I think this just wraps up a lot of like what we talked about this, and we've talked about this. So we're getting ready. We're leaving our time in the slums at Mashiyangu, and we're going to go camp up on Mount Suswa with the Maasai tribe. And that was just we do a whole episode, right? Another podcast about that experience. But we're in a passenger van bus that isn't going to make it up the mountain. That was one of the shakiest rides when we went up that mountain that I've ever been a part of.
Yes.
And so the van just pulls over, and they're like, "Here, get out. We got another car coming to pick you up." It's like a big military bus, effectively.
Transport.
I don't even know what that thing was
Mars
called.
transport that we got into.
Yeah, it was something. But they didn't tell us that thing was on the way in about 2 hours, right? Yep. So they literally put us off the bus. They give us all our suitcase. So there's 20,
and drove off.
25
and we're standing there on the side of the road.
White guys and kids and adults.
The guides we knew what was happening. Okay, we knew that was happening. We knew it was coming.
But just this perspective, we're standing on the side of the road in Kenya, waiting, looking around, and there's just big open fields and there's little villages. So people start looking, then kids kind of start running over.
Yep.
I had brought some of the M&E sunglasses. Yep. There was some candy. So kids come up, our kids go down. There's little remnants of a fence, right? So our kids climb over the fence,
hop the fence,
start playing with the kids, giving out candy. They kind of venture off a little bit, come back, and kids just playing with kids. We're hanging out. I'm chit-chatting with the adults. Then a motorcycle starts rolling up with two tribesmen, right? Because this is the Maasai.
This is the Maasai area. Yeah, there were two Maasai men.
And I knew a little bit about them, but they've got big sticks, and they're kind of hauling ass towards everybody.
Beeline towards us.
Yeah, so they're beelining. And I kind of looked at you. I don't remember if I said anything, but just I saw them coming. So I'm like, I'm walking up there. And I start going towards, because they're racing towards our kids. And I'm like, okay, I'm stepping in here, right? Power up. protection mode. You're like, no, man, it's okay. And then I think you cruised up, and then Jeremy cruised up, just walked up, had a conversation. What I was going through is, okay, yeah, we've trespassed on their land, and they're coming to get us. Like, that's what I observed through that experience.
Yeah.
And what do? Like, got to jump in there.
Yeah. Well, your natural kind of posture was, like you just said, to power up and get ready to fight. Right. So let's just put that aside. My natural posture, I don't power up to fight. I power up to like engage.
Yeah.
I power up to like, how am I going to nuance and manage and mitigate and de-escalate the situation? That's what I learned in my family of origin. And that's what I was doing there. So both of us were kind of coming from that posture of power and powering up in strength, but in a very different kind of way that we had learned as boys that was now showing up on the field.
Yeah.
And so in the past, I have been in Africa before. I've lived in the Middle East, and so I have experienced what does it look like to engage the tribe leader or the village leader. And it is all about honor.
Because all they were looking for.
Interested
in.
Yeah. Right? Well, they wanted to know who were the white people that were playing with their children and trespassing on their land.
Good question to ask.
Valid question. Okay. But they also want to know, are we a threat? You can imagine in the history of Africa with white people showing up on the scene with innocent children, like, what is going to happen to my kids? Are you going to take them? Like, all that kind of stuff. So all of that was probably in like the storied background of these tribesmen. So walking up and just Jeremy and I were able to like, hey, welcome. What is your name? I'm Jeremy. We're here with a group. We're heading up to Suswa. We're just waiting for our transport. Your kids are amazing. We love playing with your kids. what are their names? Just de-escalating the situation in that way. And I will tell you, I was super glad to know that the man who had my back is very skilled in jujitsu and knows how to like hold himself well in a physical altercation, because I do not.
Yeah. And just for me, it's like, okay, that's not needed, and it just shows that perspective. And then so then I know that it's like, okay, it was that was one of the most memorable things.
Yeah.
And then I made 5,000 pieces of mandazi. I can make Kenyan donuts. I made so many of those.
You did make a lot of those.
Chris, thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
We've got to do a follow-up episode. So many great, just deep resources for men, for leadership. This obviously translates over across just lines of your life journey, but business, wherever anybody's journeying.
Yeah.
But we wrap up the podcast same way, every guest. You grabbed a color off of our color wall right when you came in, and you've got your statement that you want to leave with the world when you leave it.
I do. Okay, so my statement was this. There is always a story deeper still. There is always a why behind every what. And I think it's just us to take the moment, to take the pause, to take a breath and wonder about what might be behind what is happening right now. What is the why behind my what? So that's my statement.
Well, man, thanks for being here. And just thank you for the work you do for the kingdom, for the world, for men, and then for everybody that they touch. Because it's the women, it's the families, it's the children, it's the generations to come, man. So honored to know you.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me today.
Thanks. It's a wrap. Hey, if you're a faith-based father and you have a son who is entering into adolescence and manhood, you've got to check out an experience that we have June 2024. It is the Father-Son Hike of a Lifetime on the Camino de Santiago in Spain. I'm going to be taking a group of men and their sons over to Spain to hike some of the most beautiful scenery through northern Spain on the Camino de Santiago. We're going to hike 6 days, 70 miles, 200,000 steps, and have completely disconnected, unplugged, uninterrupted time with our sons. We are going to grow and bond and deepen our relationships with our sons through some very intentionally curated adventures, challenges, and experiences. And we're going to do so in the company of other faith-based men who have the same desire to grow and deepen their story with their son. If you're interested in this adventure with us, go to mattshoup.com. Click the Go to Spain button and check out the Father-Son Hike of a Lifetime.